Live before the nation. Jasmine Crockett confronts Ivanka Trump in a brutal IQ clash. The numbers, the records, the arrogance, everything explodes in front of 60 million stunned Americans. In a single night, justice rises and dynasty trembles. Who walks out with the crown of truth? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room at the United States Capitol was a battlefield disguised as marble and wood. Lights blazed from every corner, scorching the air, while over 200 reporters jammed shoulder-to-shoulder cameras firing like gunshots. Every cough echoed, every shuffle was magnified, and 60 million Americans were locked to their screens, waiting for the first strike. Ivanka Trump sat dressed in flawless white legs, crossed posture, razor sharp, a cold smile slicing across her face. She looked not at her peers but at her prey. Across from her stood Jasmine Crockett, steady in black, unmoved by the spectacle. Before her rested a single green-sealed envelope, silent and menacing like a loaded weapon. Then Ivanka leaned in voice like steel dipped in venom. I look around and I see some people who couldn't even pass a basic IQ test. And sadly, Miss Crockett is one of them. Laughter cracked through the chamber cameras, exploding in flashes. Jasmine said nothing. She laid one finger on the envelope. The silence was louder than the insult. Tonight, true intelligence will be redefined. The laughter still echoed, camera flashes still stung the air, but the insult was not the end, it was the beginning. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for more blood, and Ivanka Trump seized the moment like a seasoned performer. She leaned into her microphone, her voice sharp and commanding a dare, dressed as confidence. If you're so confident, then prove it right now with an IQ question, here and now. Let the entire country decide who really belongs. The chamber erupted again, a roar of jeers and applause crashing into one another, a wave of noise pressing in from all sides. It was the challenge everyone had been waiting for, and Ivanka was certain she had won the room. Jasmine Crockett did not rise, did not flinch, did not smile. She reached calmly for the microphone and tapped it 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed like hammer strikes, slicing through the chaos, and the room froze. Reporters stopped mid-laugh. Politicians turned their heads, and millions of viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. For a heartbeat, the Capitol was silent, as if the walls themselves were listening. Then Jasmine lowered her head slightly, her voice cutting like a knife through the stillness. Fine. One simple question. Answer it wrong, not because you are stupid, but because you lack patience. The trap was set. She paused just long enough to stretch the silence tight, then delivered her challenge with crystal clarity. If 5 machines take 5 minutes to make 5 parts, how long will one machine take to make 1 part? The question was short, clean, deceptively simple. Gasps slipped from the audience, a few smirks spread across faces. This was elementary school math, nothing worthy of a battlefield. But that was the brilliance of it. The simplicity was the snare. Ivanka, certain she was in control, snapped back instantly, her voice loud and eager. 1 minute. She sat back, nodding as if the contest was already over. The silence that followed was not relief, but suffocation. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then Jasmine straightened in her chair, her tone calm but heavy with finality. 5 minutes. The words cracked like thunder. Reporters blinked, some mouths dropped open, and a few gasps escaped before the meaning spread. The math was undeniable. 5 machines in 5 minutes meant each machine required 5 minutes on its own. Ivanka had lunged at the bait and missed by a mile. The laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by stunned stillness. Then an uneasy ripple of murmurs that spread from row to row. Cameras zoomed in on Ivanka's face. Her smile faltered, her posture stiffened, her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time that night, she looked less like a polished icon and more like someone exposed. The audience shifted in their seats, whispers turning to quiet conversations, and the energy tilted like a stage light, swinging from one actor to another. Everyone could see the shift. Ivanka was no longer in command. Jasmine leaned closer to her microphone, her eyes never leaving Ivanka. She spoke not with a shout, but with precision, each word landing with weight. IQ is not about how fast you blurt an answer. IQ is about understanding the essence and controlling the ego. Her voice lingered in the silence, the lesson hitting harder than any insult. The hearing chamber, once a circus of laughter, had turned into a theater of revelation. Ivanka's face tightened. The crowd buzzed with disbelief, and Jasmine's calm presence swallowed the storm whole. The tables had turned. What began as mockery had become a reversal so sharp that the room itself seemed to tilt toward Jasmine. Ivanka, once so sure of her dominance, now sat exposed before millions. And for the first time that night, everyone watching could feel it. The balance of power had shifted, and Jasmine Crockett had seized control. The room was still vibrating from the sting of Jasmine's question and Ivanka's blunder when Ivanka suddenly lunged forward again, refusing to let the moment slip. Her face was tight, her jaw clenched, and she gripped the microphone as though it were a weapon. Her voice sharpened into a blade meant to cut Jasmine down once and for all. You come from a third-rate law school, a place where people learn only to survive, not to lead. Wharton trained leaders, Houston trained employees. The words dripped with venom, and the chamber exploded with noise. Supporters of Ivanka clapped furiously, their laughter rolling like a tide across the benches, feeding off the insult as though it were victory. Cameras flashed again, recording every mocking grin and every smirk aimed in Jasmine's direction. The jeers grew louder, echoing through the rafters, while Ivanka leaned back with the posture of a queen, certain she had delivered her fatal blow. Politicians behind her exchanged smug glances, and some even whispered snide remarks loud enough for the microphones to catch. "She's out of her league," one muttered. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted back toward arrogance, toward the idea that Jasmine had been silenced by pedigree and prestige. Viewers at home could feel the weight of the moment, the arrogance of privilege pressing down on the air. For a breath, it seemed the storm had swung back in Ivanka's favor. But Jasmine did not flinch. She did not roll her eyes. She did not strike back with a scream. Instead, she moved slowly, deliberately, sliding her hand toward the sealed green envelope that had sat untouched before her all night. The cameras zoomed in, reporters leaning forward, sensing that something was about to change. The laughter began to falter, replaced by a low hum of curiosity. Jasmine broke the seal with a soft crack, the sound carried across the microphones, and drew out a folded letter stamped with the insignia of the University of Houston Law Center. She held it up for the room to see, her expression unreadable. Her voice was steady as she began. "This is a letter signed by three of the most respected legal scholars in the United States: Professor Michael Olivas, Professor Sandra Garrett Thompson, and Professor David R. Dow. These are not politicians, not pundits, not allies. They are educators, leaders, and intellectuals recognized across this country. And this is what they wrote about me." She unfolded the page, fully lifted it close to the microphone, and started to read. The first voice came in her reading, clear and deliberate. "Congresswoman Crockett demonstrates a level of critical thinking that consistently outpaces her peers. She dissects arguments with precision, identifies flaws that others overlook, and constructs reasoning that stands up under the heaviest scrutiny. In the classroom, she was never merely competent, she was exceptional." The words filled the air like a counterpunch, carrying the authority of someone who had judged thousands of students and found Jasmine rare. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, a wave of acknowledgement spreading. Jasmine continued with the second passage. "Her legal reasoning is not only sharp, but fearless. Where others hesitate, she presses forward. Where others accept surface answers, she digs deeper until the logic is airtight. It is not exaggeration to say that her analytical skills surpass those we typically associate with Ivy League graduates. Her work proves that brilliance is not confined to pedigree, but emerges in those who refuse to be boxed in." The laughter had stopped entirely now. Heads tilted, brows furrowed, and even some of Ivanka's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Jasmine read the third statement, her voice steady, her gaze fixed on Ivanka. "If leadership is measured by the ability to confront complexity, to stand firm against intimidation, and to argue with both clarity and conviction, then Jasmine Crockett stands in the top 5% of all students I have taught in my career. Her intellect is not only formidable, it is resilient. It does not bow to power, it challenges it." The words struck like a gavel, slamming against the desk, final and irrevocable. The chamber erupted not with laughter this time, but with gasps, whispers, and the shuffling of papers as people turned to one another, asking if they had truly heard what they just heard. Reporters scrambled to type their screens, lighting up with breaking headlines. Photographers snapped furiously, not wanting to miss the image of Jasmine holding the letter, her expression calm and unshaken. The authority of three of the nation's most prominent legal scholars now stood against Ivanka's sneer. Ivanka tried to laugh, the sound high-pitched and brittle, more desperate than confident. She leaned back, lips curling into something that was meant to be disdain, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted, restless, uncertain. The smile on her face fought against the flicker of doubt in her gaze. She looked smaller, less untouchable, as though the fortress of prestige she had built around herself had suddenly cracked open. And then Jasmine did the most devastating thing of all: nothing. She folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it on the table with deliberate calm. She did not gloat, did not sneer, did not raise her voice. She simply sat in silence, her hands resting still, her eyes forward. The sound of that silence drowned out every smirk, every half-hearted chuckle. It was heavier than words, heavier than applause. The silence itself had won. The silence after the letter did not last long. Ivanka snapped back to the mic, voice sharp enough to cut. "You like flashing recommendation letters. Anyone can write letters. But real IQ shows in managing billions of dollars, something you'll never touch." Laughter rolled from her side of the room, smug and loud, as cameras flashed like strobe lights. A few supporters clapped on cue, savoring the insult as if it settled the fight. Jasmine didn't blink. She raised a hand and signaled to three allied members of Congress seated behind her. They stood, straightened their papers, and stepped toward the row of microphones lined across the table. The room's lights seemed to tighten like a spotlight closing in. The sound tech nudged the faders up, and the first voice came through clear and steady. Internal memo excerpt. The first lawmaker read, eyes on the page, and voice aimed at the chamber. Ivanka treats staff as low IQ and pressures them to sign off on an improper workflow. The words hit with the clean force of a hammer. A low tremor passed through the crowd, soft gasps, a few sharp inhales, a shifting of bodies and chairs. The insult Ivanka had tossed into the air suddenly felt heavier, no longer a joke, no longer safe. The second lawmaker stepped in without a pause, microphone catching every consonant. Email traffic, quote, "Image is the #1 priority, IQ does not matter," end quote. A hum rose across the benches, then stilled, as if the room itself needed a second to absorb it. People turned to each other, eyes wide, lips forming silent questions. The sentence hung there like a flare in the dark, casting a new light on everything that had been said. The third lawmaker squared his shoulders and leaned into the mic so the cameras would catch the words clean. Approval note, quote, "We need publicity, not real IQ," end quote. The line dropped like a verdict. The loudspeakers sent it to the far corners of the chamber, into the halls, and out to living rooms across the country. In that amplified echo, an entire pattern emerged, and it sounded nothing like leadership. Ivanka lurched toward her mic, voice pitched high, breath tight and fast. Distortion. "You don't understand," she shouted, palm cutting the air. But the three voices had stacked like a chord ringing from the speakers, with more weight than any single protest could match. The chorus of documented words, memo, email, approval, drowned her out without even trying. What had begun as a taunt now felt like a record playing back the choices behind the taunt. Support tilted. You could see it in the posture of people who had been laughing minutes earlier. Now they leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes narrowed at the pages instead of the personalities. The applause from Ivanka's corner thinned to a few stray claps, and then stopped altogether, replaced by a tense murmur that favored Jasmine. Reporters started typing, harder faces lit by their screens as captions formed in real time. The cameras drifted, leaving Ivanka's white suit to find Jasmine's calm frame and the three steady readers at her side. In the pressure of that moment, the room picked a side, and it wasn't the one that mocked IQ. The chamber was still buzzing from the damning documents when Ivanka suddenly exploded. Her voice cracked through the microphone like a whip, shrill and furious. "Your IQ is only good enough to spout empty cliches. If you were truly smart, you'd have a billion-dollar company like I do." The words echoed across the hall, sharp and jagged, landing with more venom than strategy. Cameras snapped instantly, catching her flushed face and the wild glare in her eyes. It was no longer the polished composure of a brand icon. It was raw anger live for the world to see. The audience split. Some of her loyal supporters clapped loudly, desperate to keep the energy on her side, while others shifted in their seats, discomfort plain on their faces. A few shook their heads, murmuring that this was going too far. The energy in the room shifted again, the pendulum swinging toward unease rather than triumph. Even through the broadcast, viewers at home could sense it. Ivanka was no longer calculated. She was rattled. Jasmine moved with deliberate calm, lowering her chin slightly before leaning into her microphone. Her voice was deep, steady, and carried the weight of finality. IQ is not measured by inherited wealth. IQ is measured by the ability to hold principle when temptation strikes. The line landed like a hammer against steel, reverberating through the chamber, silencing the applause. For a moment, all you could hear was the thrum of the microphones and the pounding of hearts. The statement cut through the noise not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. On live television, commentators whispered over the feed. Ivanka is losing her composure, while Jasmine is keeping the rhythm. One voice noted a tremor of surprise in his tone. The camera zoomed back to Ivanka, who was still shouting, still waving her hands in fury, but each word sounded thinner, weaker, less convincing. The more she yelled, the more her credibility slipped away. In contrast, Jasmine's silence after her statement was louder than Ivanka's storm. And in that silence, America saw who truly commanded the room. The chamber still trembled from the last exchange. Ivanka straightened her shoulders and forced herself back into control, though the tightness in her smile betrayed the effort. She leaned forward, her tone dripping with the certainty of pedigree. I don't need to prove my IQ. The whole world knows I was a Wharton student, the elite of America. The words rang with arrogance, designed to remind everyone of her brand, her family, her supposed untouchable class. For a beat, it seemed she was trying to stitch back together her crumbling authority with nothing but the Wharton name. But Jasmine was ready. She reached under her stack of papers and pulled out a thick black folder. Without hesitation, she slammed it down on the table. The sound thud ripped through the microphones, sharp and heavy, bouncing against the marble walls. The chamber reacted instantly. A chorus of gasps swept the rows. Chairs scraped back, and whispers rippled like a wave through the stunned crowd. The camera lights caught the bold white lettering on the cover, Wharton Records. Confidential. It was a name that carried weight, but now it was branded with secrecy. Jasmine placed her hand flat on the folder, eyes locked on Ivanka. The silence thickened tense as a drawn bow. She opened it slowly, deliberately, each motion magnified by the anticipation in the room. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicking in machine gun rhythm. Then in a voice measured and unshakable, Jasmine began to read. Ivanka Trump, logical reasoning, 42 out of 100. Note requires assistance with critical analysis. Evaluation signed by Dr. Harold Bennett, professor of behavioral logic, Wharton School. The words slammed into the chamber like a verdict. They weren't whispers, weren't rumors, they were cold written assessment. The reaction was immediate. A loud "oh" swept across the gallery, some people clutching their chests, others exchanging shocked glances. Chairs shifted again, the scrape of wood against marble underscoring the unease. A senator dropped his pen with a sharp clatter. Reporters muttered as they typed "racing" to push the quote across social media. Millions of viewers at home saw the crawl appear. Crockett reveals Wharton record, Ivanka Trump. Logic 42 out of 100. The weight of numbers and names carried more force than insults ever could. Ivanka's face went pale, then flushed red. She gripped her mic so hard her knuckles whitened. This is fake fabricated. I will sue every single one of you. She shrieked, voice high and cracking under the pressure. She slammed her palm on the desk, the sound harsh and frantic. But the louder she shouted, the smaller she seemed. The fury only exposed her unraveling composure. People who had cheered minutes ago now shifted uncomfortably, as though ashamed to be aligned with her rage. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She waited, letting Ivanka's outburst echo and collapse into itself. Then, leaning just close enough to the microphone for her words to cut through the noise, she delivered the final blow. If it's false, release the real record. But for 20 years, why has it stayed sealed? The line landed with the weight of truth, clean and devastating. No flourish, no insult, only the question that had haunted Ivanka for decades. The chamber froze. For a long second there was nothing. No laughter, no shuffling, just the sound of air tightening in the lungs of hundreds of people. Then the silence broke. Applause erupted like thunder rolling across the room, joined by cheers and shouts that drowned out even the pounding of the gavel. The chair struck his mallet again and again, desperate to restore order, but the chamber had already exploded. Television audiences saw the moment replay. In real time, Jasmine, calm and grounded Ivanka, frantic and flailing, and between them a black folder stamped with the truth. It wasn't just a clash of egos anymore. It was the image of a dynasty unraveling under the weight of a single number. And as the crowd rose to its feet, clapping and shouting, it was clear who had seized the night. The chamber still shook from the clash over the Wharton folder, but Jasmine had one final move. She reached for the sealed green envelope that had been waiting untouched from the very start. Reporters who had followed every twist of the duel zoomed their lenses in the light from their flashes, bouncing off the wax seal. The silence grew thick, almost unbearable, as every eye locked onto her hands. Slowly, deliberately, she broke the seal. The sound was small, but in that silence it cracked like thunder. This was the moment, the one card she had held back for the very end. Jasmine unfolded the document inside a crisp sheet stamped with an official seal and signed by 3 senior professors from the University of Houston Law Center. Her voice was steady, carrying the gravity of truth across the chamber. This is a certified evaluation of my intellectual capacity conducted by an independent academic board. It states, and I quote, "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett consistently demonstrates exceptional legal reasoning, ranking in the top 5% of all students evaluated over 2 decades." Gasps cut through the air. Even those who had mocked her earlier leaned forward now, hanging on every word. She continued, her tone rising with each line, the page trembling slightly in her hand as the microphones caught every syllable. The evaluation further states, "Her ability to dismantle arguments, identify structural flaws, and rebuild them with airtight logic surpasses the performance levels we often attribute to Ivy League graduates. In direct comparison, her analytical output meets, and in several areas exceeds, the standards we expect from top-tier Ivy League law students." The words landed like blows, each one driving deeper into the heart of Ivanka's defense. There was no shouting here, no anger, just cold documented proof. The room erupted into whispers, reporters scribbling furiously, phones buzzing as live updates shot across social media. Senators exchanged looks of disbelief, some shaking their heads as though they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Jasmine's calm voice cut through it all, the paper raised high under the white glare of the lights. "My IQ has been made public. Where is yours, Ivanka? Or is it locked away like your Wharton records?" The mix of English and Vietnamese for emphasis jolted the air, her voice low and unyielding, echoing like a hammer across stone. For a moment the chamber hung suspended. Then the explosion came. Applause burst like cannon fire rolling through the hall as senators rose from their seats. The thunder of clapping hands was joined by shouts, whistles, and chants from the gallery. Even the chairman's gavel pounding against the block again and again couldn't quiet the roar. The scene was chaos, wrapped in triumph, the kind of eruption that no producer could have scripted. Every camera on the floor turned toward Jasmine, her black suit a stark silhouette against the storm of noise. Ivanka sat frozen. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale under the lights. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, only a stifled sound that never reached the microphone. The confident smile that had carried her through the night was gone, replaced with the vacant stare of someone cornered with no way out. Her hands gripped the desk knuckles, white eyes darting toward the cameras as if searching for a lifeline. But there was none. The evidence had spoken louder than any defense she could muster. The meaning of the moment was clear to everyone in the room and to the millions watching at home. The green envelope was no longer just a prop, it had become the final nail, the decisive strike that transformed a duel of insults into a crushing defeat. Jasmine's proof had not only neutralized Ivanka's claim to pedigree, it had redefined the battlefield. Intelligence wasn't measured by inherited wealth, flashy titles, or sealed records. It was measured by resilience, clarity, and truth. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett had claimed absolute victory. The roar from the chamber had barely faded when the story jumped the walls and detonated in newsrooms around the world. Assignment desks barked orders, producers cut highlights, and chirons locked into place. In a single searing line, Ivanka collapses in the IQ duel. Jasmine becomes a symbol of justice. Phones lit up with push alerts, the headline repeating like a drumbeat from Washington to Warsaw. Anchors spoke in quick, clipped sentences, the cadence of breaking news, the envelope, the number, the question that couldn't be dodged. Papers rushed out special digital editions. Radio hosts cut into playlists with urgent bulletins. What began as a hearing had turned into a global headline, and the wording was not kind to Ivanka. On social feeds, the footage spread like wildfire, the tap on the mic, the calm voice, the document raised to the light. Group chats flooded, college dorms, co-working spaces, and cafes turned into mini newsrooms, screens propped against coffee cups. The phrase that rose from the noise was simple and electric, the symbol of challenging power. Young voters typed it, posted it, hashtagged it, and stitched the clip with their own reactions. They didn't talk about pedigree. They talked about receipts, about the courage to hold a line when the room was hostile. To them, it wasn't just a political moment. It was a template for standing up and staying steady. In barbershops, garages, VFW halls, and corner bars, the conversation sounded different but landed in the same place. Men over 50 watched the replay and nodded through the silence between Jasmine's words. They spoke in plain terms, weighing what they'd seen like they'd weigh an engine or a ledger. Steady hands, clean proof, no wobble. The line they repeated was blunt and unadorned. Intelligence is not bragging, it is proof. They weren't buying volume or flash. They were buying the way the numbers and the statements snapped together. For them, the win wasn't in the cheer, it was in the checkable facts. Inside the political class, the impact registered as a tremor that kept growing. Staffers refreshed internals and saw undecideds break away from the spectacle and move toward the person who kept her voice low and her evidence high. Whip counts were redrawn on whiteboards. Safe assumptions got a hard strike through them. Donor calls went suddenly quiet on one side and very busy on the other. In moderate circles, the logic was ruthless: distance yourself from the meltdown. Lean into the adult in the room. By night's end, more than a few centrists had shifted their weight toward Jasmine. News tickers kept cycling the same sharp sentence: Ivanka collapses in the IQ duel. Jasmine becomes a symbol of justice. It framed everything that followed, the young calling her the symbol of challenging power, the older saying, intelligence is not bragging, it is proof, and the middle of the map inching her way. The story didn't need embroidery. It had form and force on its own. A room that began with laughter had ended with standing applause, and the echo carried far beyond the Capitol. In the space where noise usually wins restraint and receipts had stolen the night. The chamber was still vibrating with noise when Jasmine finally raised her hand and asked for silence. The applause tapered, the chants faded, and the sound of the gavel echoed into stillness. Her eyes scanned the room, steady and sharp, and she leaned into the microphone with the calm of someone who knew the world was listening. The camera zoomed in, capturing the weight of her expression. This was no longer about winning an argument or shaming an opponent. This was about defining what intelligence truly meant in a country that often confused noise with wisdom. Her voice was low, deliberate, but it carried with the force of a storm. IQ is not a weapon for humiliation, she said, her tone slicing through the silence. IQ is a measure of thought, of reason, of the ability to solve problems without losing yourself. The room seemed to inhale as one. Senators froze with pens in hand. Reporters paused their typing, and millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens. A truly intelligent person, Jasmine continued, does not shout to prove they are right. A truly intelligent person holds to principle even when the world dares them to abandon it. The words fell heavy, each one striking like a gavel on oak, reverberating in the bones of everyone listening. The rhythm of her speech was different now, shifting from defense to revelation. Her body stilled as though grounded to the desk, but her words moved with unstoppable momentum. Do not mistake volume for value, she said. The loudest voice in the room may be the emptiest. True intelligence is measured in patience, in restraint, in the courage to sit still when others thrash about. The chamber seemed to darken with gravity, the spotlight shrinking to her alone. People who had laughed earlier now stared, almost afraid to blink. She leaned closer and her tone sharpened. 3 lessons stand before us tonight. The first, never let mockery distract you. Do not hand over your ground when someone ridicules you. Hold the line, breathe, and keep your footing. That is where power lives. The second, always bring evidence. Truth is not a debate. Truth is a fact, a paper, a record. Proof outlives insults and transparency defeats every tantrum. And the third, intelligence is not a number on a test. Intelligence is the marriage of logic, of ethics, and of courage. Logic without ethics is manipulation. Ethics without courage is weakness. Courage without logic is recklessness. Only when all three stand together do we see true IQ. A murmur of agreement rolled across the room, soft but unstoppable, like the tide creeping in under a locked door. Jasmine held her gaze steady, her eyes fixed on the front rows. She knew these lessons were not just for Ivanka or for the politicians squirming in their seats. They were for every person watching from a living room, a bar, a truck cab, a small-town diner. She let the silence stretch, let the weight settle, then drove the next nail. Do not think these are words for ivory towers. They are words for daily life. Her voice shifted into a story plain and direct. A man in his 50s sits at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of him. He does not brag about IQ. He does not mock his neighbor. He calculates retirement savings. He balances what goes to his children, what goes to his wife, what is left for himself. He uses logic to make the numbers work. He uses patience to resist spending what he cannot afford. He uses courage to admit the truth when the money falls short. That is intelligence. Not the size of a company, not the roar of a crowd, but the ability to manage life with clarity and with honor. The words cracked like lightning in the quiet. Older men in the audience nodded, lips pressed thin, their eyes reflecting the recognition of lived truth. She pressed forward, relentless now. You want a tool to fight back when someone calls you low IQ, I will give you one. 5 steps. 5 steps that turn an insult into dust. Her hand-lifted fingers folding down one by one as she counted. First stop. Do not answer in anger. The moment you flare, you lose. Second, look. Identify what is real and what is empty noise. Third, respond with logic. State a fact, not a feeling. Fourth, bring evidence. A paper, a number, a precedent. Fifth, end with restraint. Walk away if you must, but walk away having kept your ground. Her voice rose on the last word, the syllables sharp and final. The chamber erupted in a low hum of voices, reporters, typing with furious speed, commentators, already whispering into microphones. Jasmine did not flinch. She continued, each line building like a drumbeat. That is how you win. Not by shouting louder, not by claiming titles, not by clinging to family names. You win by staying calm, by proving your case, by letting truth speak louder than ego. The cameras caught her face in close up, the fire in her eyes tempered by composure. It was not a grin, not a smirk, but a look of iron focus. She lifted the evaluation paper again, shaking it slightly for emphasis, the microphone catching the faint rustle. This says I stand in the top 5% of legal minds evaluated. It says my reasoning equals and in key areas exceeds the Ivy League standard. And I tell you this, not to boast, but to show what cannot be erased. Compare pedigree all you want. Compare wealth all you want. In the end, only the work remains. Only the logic, the ethics, and the courage remain. The crowd breathed out in a rush, the realization sweeping across the chamber like a storm tide. Jasmine's voice slowed, heavy with meaning. When they call you dumb, remember it is because they have nothing else to say. When they scream low IQ, remember it is because they cannot stand against your evidence. And when they laugh, remember laughter dies fast, but truth echoes forever. She placed the paper back into its envelope, her hands steady, her eyes unbroken. The sound of the fold was like the click of a lock, sealing the point beyond challenge. The silence stretched again, but this time it was not tense. It was reverent. Heads bowed slightly as though the room had transformed from a hearing chamber into a sanctuary. The weight of her words hung heavy, undeniable, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with the realization that intelligence was not what had been sold, but what had been shown. Reporters mouthed her phrases, already knowing they would be quoted on front pages. Viewers at home reached for their phones, typing out the lessons before they faded from memory. In that moment, Jasmine was no longer just defending herself against an insult. She was teaching. She was reframing intelligence for an entire nation watching live. And the people knew it. They felt it in their bones. IQ was not humiliation. IQ was clarity, discipline, and courage forged together. Jasmine Crockett had not only won the battle in the chamber, she had rewritten the rules of what it meant to be truly intelligent. The storm of applause from Jasmine's last words had not yet died down when the chairman's gavel struck again and again, but this time no one wanted silence. The chamber had turned electric. Senators who rarely stood during hearings pushed their chairs back and rose to their feet. The gallery erupted into cheers that blurred into the deafening rhythm of hundreds of hands clapping in unison. The sound was raw, unpolished, and unstoppable, less a ceremony, more an earthquake. Television microphones struggled to hold the roar, the meters spiking red as if the walls themselves were shaking. This was not just applause. It was a declaration, a verdict from the people watching inside and far beyond the chamber's walls. Amid the chaos, the cameras caught Ivanka. The once pristine figure in her white suit now sat hunched, shoulders curved inward, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as if holding herself upright. Her eyes stayed downcast, her lips pressed thin into silence. For the first time that night, she did not look at the cameras. She did not flash a smile or raise her chin. She stared at the table, face pale under the harsh lights. Every flicker of the lens magnified the defeat. It was written in her posture, in the way she seemed to shrink as the chamber grew louder. The camera operators knew where the story was. Slowly, deliberately, the broadcast shifted away from Ivanka's bowed head. Lenses tightened, zooming in on Jasmine at the center of the storm. The lights caught her face, illuminating every line of calm, resolve, every ounce of steady confidence that had carried her through the night. In that frame, she looked larger than the room, as though she were not just addressing the chamber, but the entire nation watching beyond. The image was cinematic, the kind of closing shot that anchors itself in memory forever. The roar of applause rolled on, but Jasmine did not rush. She waited, her hands folded on the table, her body still. She let the crowd spend its noise until it was no longer a storm, but a steady rhythm. Then she rose, the black suit gleaming under the light, and leaned into her microphone one last time. Her voice came clear and steady, cutting through the thunder with the precision of a blade. IQ does not define us, justice defines us. The words cracked like lightning, short, sharp, and final. The chamber exploded again, but this time the noise carried the weight of closure. Reporters in the press gallery scrambled, typing the line into headlines before the sound of applause even faded. Anchors whispered into their earpieces, repeating the phrase for live audiences: IQ does not define us. Justice defines us. In living rooms across America, people leaned back in their chairs, the sentence ringing in their ears. Some mouthed it silently, others repeated it aloud, but all of them knew they had just heard the line that would outlive the hearing itself. The transition from chaos to clarity was complete. Jasmine had taken a night of insults, shouts, and arrogance, and turned it into a statement that cut to the heart of the nation's unease. The image of her framed under the lights, the words flowing across news tickers, the silence of Ivanka with her head bowed. These were the elements that would replay endlessly in highlight reels, in classrooms, in campaign ads, and in history itself. The chamber had witnessed not only a confrontation, but the creation of a symbol. As the clapping continued, Jasmine did not gloat. She did not smile or revel in her opponent's defeat. She simply stood her posture, steady her gaze forward, letting the room burn around her, while she remained calm at its center. That composure was its own kind of victory. The more the crowd roared, the quieter she seemed to become. And in that quiet was the power that would linger long after the sound died away. The gavel struck again, futile against the wave of voices, but Jasmine lifted her hand gently, asking for stillness one final time. The applause softened, though the energy in the room still vibrated like a live wire. She did not speak again. She didn't need to. The last words, IQ does not define us. Justice defines us, still hung in the air, echoing long after they had been spoken. It was the kind of line that could not be topped, the kind of truth that demanded silence to absorb. Outside the chamber, cameras swarmed. Journalists shouted questions, but even their voices were quieter, subdued by what they had just witnessed. They weren't hunting for scandal anymore. They were chasing history. Headlines were already forming in their minds, all built around the same line. The phrase would be printed on banners, posted across feeds, debated in podcasts, and quoted in speeches for years to come. Inside, Ivanka remained motionless, her head still down, her hands still trembling against the wood. Around her, allies shuffled, unsure whether to comfort her or distance themselves. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was louder than any defense. The image of Ivanka's bowed head and Jasmine's upright frame would tell the story on its own. And so the hearing ended, not with a procedural close, but with a standing ovation that blurred into history. The lights dimmed slightly, the cameras pulled back, and the people in the chamber filed out with the buzz of having seen something that would outlast them. The air still vibrated, charged with the recognition that intelligence alone had not carried the day. Principle had. The hearing that began with mockery had closed with a lesson. The woman once dismissed as low IQ had redefined intelligence before the eyes of millions. And as the last echoes of clapping faded into memory, the final shot lingered, Jasmine Crockett standing tall in the light, her words still vibrating across the nation. Her opponent bowed in silence. The battle was over. The definition had changed. The roar of the chamber still echoed in the minds of millions when Jasmine's last words began their second life. Television stations replayed the clip on loop anchors, voices trembling as they repeated the line, "IQ does not define us. Justice defines us." Within hours, the words leapt from the closed walls of the Capitol to the open veins of the internet. Hashtags blazed across platforms, trending worldwide before the sun set. Screens lit up in bedrooms, offices, and train cars across continents. People didn't just watch the hearing. They adopted it. They carried it. They turned a single sentence into a living banner. In New York, newspapers printed it in bold type above the fold, the letters stretching across front pages like a national verdict. In London, radio hosts quoted it during morning rush hour, their voices swelling with the weight of something more than politics. In Tokyo, the evening news placed it beside images of Jasmine standing tall under the glare of white light, her opponent bowed and beaten. The translation flickered beneath the broadcast, but the power of the words required no explanation. Across languages, the rhythm carried, "IQ is not identity, justice is." On social media, the phrase became a shorthand for defiance. Activists pasted it on banners, college students painted it on cardboard signs, workers scrawled it on break room whiteboards. The line traveled from hashtags to memes to protest chants. Its journey unstoppable, its shape shifting with every voice that repeated it. Commentators compared it to the great one-liners of history, the sentences that outlived their speakers. It was not only a closing argument, it was a rallying cry, a distillation of truth sharpened in the heat of conflict. But beyond the noise of feeds and broadcasts, the image that anchored the moment was quieter. Cameras caught Jasmine's hand as she slid the green envelope back across the polished wood of the desk. The seal was broken, the truth inside had been revealed, yet she closed it again and set it flat before her. The gesture was subtle, almost delicate, but the symbolism thundered louder than applause. She was not clutching it, not waving it, not milking the victory. She was reminding everyone that proof does not need to shout to remain powerful. She leaned into the microphone once more, her voice low but heavy with finality. True IQ does not need to be flaunted. It needs to be proven through action and justice. The words were softer than her previous lines, but in their restraint, they carried more weight. They landed with the sound of a gavel, sealing the night not in fury but in clarity. The cameras froze on the envelope, the green wax cracked, but closed again, a silent monument to what had been revealed. That image replayed again and again on broadcasts, the hand, the envelope, the words. From that day, the green envelope itself became a symbol. Illustrators drew it into political cartoons, painters recreated it on murals, and designers printed it onto t-shirts and posters. It was no longer just a folder of papers, it was the physical reminder that truth once unveiled could never be buried again. Every time the image surfaced, the caption followed. True IQ does not need to be flaunted. It needs to be proven through action and justice. The sentence and the symbol fused inseparable immortal. Global leaders even referenced it in their speeches. A European prime minister quoted it during a debate on corruption, his voice carrying the words into parliaments thousands of miles away. An African activist shouted it into a megaphone during a protest march, the crowd echoing it back in thunderous unison. In classrooms, teachers used it to frame lessons on ethics and critical thinking students, scribbling the phrase in notebooks like a mantra. The ripple widened each day, proving the point Jasmine had made: intelligence is not spectacle. It is legacy. Back in America, men in their 50s watching from kitchens, garages, and local diners passed the line among themselves. They repeated it over coffee cups, shaking their heads with a certain pride. They said it to their sons and grandsons, pointing to the replay on the TV. That's it. That's the truth right there. Not about bragging, not about money, but about how you hold your ground. In their voices, the sentence sounded less like politics and more like life advice passed down as surely as a family story. For younger generations, the line became a battle cry. In universities, students scrawled it on dorm walls. In protests, it was chanted to the beat of drums. Online, it was clipped into motivational videos, layered over music shared millions of times. The universality of the phrase gave it wings. It belonged to no single party, no single movement. It belonged to anyone who believed that dignity was stronger than insult, that truth outlasts spectacle. The green envelope lay at the heart of it all, its cracked seal frozen in photographs and broadcast footage. To some it looked ordinary, even dull, a piece of stationery. But to millions it became a relic of resistance. It was the proof that when insult and privilege collided with patience and evidence, the outcome was undeniable. People spoke of it as though it were a torch passed forward, not just a folder set down. The ripple effect continued in politics, where the phrase forced colleagues, opponents, and commentators alike to shift their language. IQ stopped being a punchline in debates. Instead, it became a reminder of how low such attacks could sink. Justice defines us became the counterweight, quoted by senators, governors, even mayors looking to align themselves with the winning side of the narrative. Slowly, what had started as an insult was buried under the weight of a redefinition, and Jasmine's voice became the measure. And yet the most enduring moment remained the quietest one. The chamber full of noise, the cameras flashing, the crowd on its feet. But in the center, Jasmine gently closing the envelope and sliding it onto the desk. The message was carved not in marble, but in action. Proof speaks for itself. That single gesture carried farther than 1,000 shouts. It was the embodiment of the phrase she had just spoken, the closing note that bound the night together. The world replayed it endlessly, from cable news highlight reels to viral GIFs on social platforms. People saw the same image in different corners of their lives: the envelope on a mural, the quote on a billboard, the line in a speech, and it always circled back to that one message. True IQ does not perform. True IQ does not posture. True IQ proves itself through action, through endurance, through justice. And as the days passed, the phrase held its grip. It wasn't just a headline anymore. It was a banner, a chant, a whisper, a lesson. The Capitol hearing had ended, but its aftershock rattled every corner of society. The last image, the green envelope resting flat against the table, its truth sealed again, but never silenced, became the final word in a duel that had captured the eyes of the world. And with it, the definition of intelligence itself had shifted forever. When the roar finally fades and the cameras drift back, what stays is the lesson beating under the noise. The scene is still hot, the air still charged, but the dust clears enough to see the shape of what mattered. Not the flash, not the insult, not the pedigree shouted like a brand. What mattered was the steady hand, the clean proof, the choice to stand firm without shouting. That is where the human story begins, and that is where this chapter keeps its power. First, intelligence is not a blade for cutting people down. It is a light for finding the way. You do not swing it to humiliate. You lift it to see the next right step. The person who makes others small does not grow. They shrink into their echo. The person who keeps their center when pushed, who thinks before striking, rises in the room without asking permission. In a world that rewards volume, the quiet truth still hits hardest. Second speed is not wisdom. A fast answer can be a wrong answer dressed in confidence. Patience is the higher gear, the one that holds when the road turns and the guardrail vanishes. You breathe, you count the beats, you let the trap of hurry pass by. Then you place the correct piece and the board changes without a shout. Third, evidence outruns ego every single time. Talk can swell, posture can fill the screen, but a page, a number, a record does not flinch. You present it, and the room pivots because proof carries weight the tongue cannot fake. You don't need a chorus when the facts sing on their own. In the end, receipts are louder than reputations. Fourth principle is the anchor you throw into a storm. When pressure rises and applause tempts, it holds you to the line you chose in calm water. Anyone can be honest when it costs nothing. Intelligence shows when the price appears. The test is not whether you can talk about values, but whether you can keep them when the lights burn hottest. If you can, you do not drift, you lead. Fifth, leadership is not volume, it is service. It speaks clearly so people can act, not to make them clap. It does the slow, unglamorous work that keeps the rails straight and the books clean. It treats disagreement as a duty, not an insult. It remembers that human dignity is not a stage prop, it is the point. For men in their 50s, watching from a kitchen chair or a workbench, the lesson lands in simple terms. Intelligence is the quiet call you make when the numbers are tight and the month is long. It is telling your kid the truth about a bill instead of hiding it under the pile. It is patching the roof first and postponing the shiny purchase because winter is coming. It is not bragging. It is balancing, choosing, holding the line when no one is clapping. For the young, the message is just as clear, but it tastes like charge and challenge. Ask for proof, not volume. Run toward the hard question, not the easy cheer. Build arguments brick by brick. Do not paint them on smoke. And when the crowd leans on you to yell, remember that the sharpest sound in any room is still the click of evidence landing. If someone throws low IQ at you, there is a path that beats anger. Stop and breathe before you answer. The first breath is your shield. Sort the noise from the fact. Not every sentence deserves your energy. State one clear point in plain words. Let understanding carry it, not ornament. Hold up a proof, even a small one. Papers change rooms. Then end with restraint. The quiet exit can be the loudest blow. These steps are not tricks. They are habits that turn heat into signal. They work at a town hall, and they work at a dinner table. They work when your boss talks over you, and they work when someone online tries to drag you into a flame war. The form never changes. Calm, clarify, prove close. You choose the tempo. You set the terms. There is also the heart of intelligence that people forget to name: empathy. It listens long enough to hear the real problem under the loud complaint. It asks what outcome would be fair before asking how to win. It knows that the other person has a life, a fear, a bill due, a wound you cannot see. When you move with that awareness, your logic stops being a weapon and becomes a bridge. Courage is the fuse that lights all of this. Sometimes it means speaking a sentence no one wants to hear. Sometimes it means saying nothing when noise would only feed the fire. Sometimes it means standing alone for a beat that feels like an hour. The room may jeer, the cameras may lean, but fear shrinks when it meets a steady posture. Courage does not roar. It holds. Justice is not a slogan pinned to a lapel. It is a daily habit. It looks like paying what you owe and admitting when you are wrong. It looks like giving others the same standard you claim for yourself. It looks like fixing the mistake instead of bearing it under spin. In the small acts, the bigger truths take root. Trust is a bank account you build with deposits of proof. You add to it when you explain your choice and show your work. You add to it when you keep your word after the spotlight moves. You add to it when you treat the person across from you as a person, not a prop. Spend it carefully, earn it always. There will always be those who perform intelligence as a costume. They talk in borrowed phrases and lean on borrowed names. They confuse pedigree with mastery and applause with authority. But their lines crack when the air gets thin because costumes do not breathe. What endures is the body under the cloth, the discipline, the patience, the evidence, the human care. So the human lesson is simple and fierce. Intelligence is not the insult you throw. It is the choice you make. It is how you carry yourself when your pride is poked. It is the record you can open without fear. It is the peace you keep while the storm tries to use you for a show. Write it on a card. If you must fold it into your wallet, tape it above your desk. When someone tries to make you small, read it and choose your ground. When someone offers you the easy roar, pick the harder truth. When someone asks for your proof, hand it over without flinch. That is the rhythm that wins without gloating. And remember this on quiet mornings, when nothing is at stake and no one is watching. Those are the hours that train your hands, your voice, your judgment. Practice patience then, and you will have it when the room burns. Practice clarity then, and you will bring it when the air fills with smoke. Practice fairness then, and you will not lose yourself when the lights come on. In the end, people will forget the noise, but remember the stance. They will forget the sneer, but remember the proof. They will forget the theater, but remember the line you would not cross. Intelligence is not a stunt. It is a standard. Hold it and it will hold you when the floor shakes. That is the human lesson. Do the work, bring the proof, keep your nerve, and let justice steer. If you can do that, you do not need to shout who you are. The room will see it. The camera will catch it. And when the night is over, the story will still be yours. The noise died, the cameras cooled, and what remained was the message that refused to fade. From the human lesson came a sharper edge, a code you can carry into any room, any argument, any storm. It says the loudest person is not the strongest person, and the fanciest title is not the clearest mind. It says proof beats posture, patience beats panic, and character beats spectacle. It asks a simple question before every response: are you trying to win the moment, or are you trying to win the truth? That is where the meaningful message begins. Intelligence is not a crown, it is a compass. You do not wear it to be seen, you use it to find the next right step when the path vanishes under your feet. When someone swings IQ like a club, you do not reach for a bigger club. You reach for clarity. You slow your breathing, you strip away the bait, you answer with one clean fact that cannot be pushed over. That is the difference between noise and knowledge. One wants attention, the other wants accuracy. Keep choosing accuracy. Justice is the shape intelligence takes when it grows up. It is intelligence with a backbone. Intelligence with guardrails, intelligence guided by rules that apply to everyone, especially when it hurts. Justice is why receipts matter, why timelines matter, why the same standard must cross every door. It is the reason humility sits next to confidence in the same chair, and the reason outcomes must match promises when the lights turn off. This is the sentence that locked into place and would not let go. IQ does not define us. Justice defines us. For leaders, the message is a contract, not a slogan. Do the work in the daylight, show your math, and let the public check it without begging for permission. Stop selling pedigree and start delivering results measured in lives improved, dollars accounted for, and rules obeyed. If you miss the mark, say so quickly, fix it publicly, and document the fix so others can follow it. Make "I don't know yet" a show of strength, not a confession of weakness. Lead so that people can trust the process even when they do not like the verdict. For everyday people, the message is simpler but just as hard. When you are mocked, hold your ground. When you are baited, keep your center. When you are challenged, bring something that can be verified. Put fewer words on the fire and more truth on the table. Say what you can prove and stop where you can't. That line alone will change the room. And if the crowd still demands a show, let them have the silence that follows a fact. Silence can be the loudest conviction. For communities, the message is a culture worth defending. Argue without stripping dignity. Disagree without rewriting the rules. Reward the person who brings receipts more than the person who brings applause. Build rituals that turn fairness into muscle memory. Open records, clear timelines, repeatable audits, honest corrections. Teach children that courage is not the shout, it is the steady voice that can still be heard after the shouting ends. The message also draws a hard boundary around power. Power that hides proof is not strong, it is scared. Power that demands flattery is not stable, it is brittle. Power that fears questions has already answered them poorly. The cure is not more Polish, but more light, not more performance, but more procedure. With each answer that is measurable, power becomes just another word for responsibility kept. And there is a promise tucked inside this message. You do not need to be perfect to be principled. You need to be clear, consistent, and correctable. You need to be brave enough to pause, smart enough to check, and humble enough to amend. Every time you do, you raise the floor under your feet and the ceiling over everyone else's head. That is how small choices turn into a larger standard. So carry the message where the microphones cannot go into kitchens, workshops, classrooms, union halls, quiet corners where the real decisions are made. Remember that the world does not change because someone bragged louder. It changes because someone proved more and quit less. If you must choose, choose the truth that lasts over the victory that trends. Let your mind be a ledger, not a loudspeaker. Let your record be the argument that speaks when you do not. And when the next test comes, and it always does, keep the words within reach clear as a signal flare in fog. Breathe, think, prove, close. Then leave the room better than you found it. The headline may fade, but the message will not. IQ does not define us. Justice defines us. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.